a lot of people look on it with the planning and the houses and things that are coming up, is that it's going to be for local people, and possibly young people as well feel, well, we need houses, we need jobs. Do you think that the planners are going the right way about to give local people houses and jobs?
No, because one of the things I used to do was sit in the planning, the housing committee with, it was mainly sheltered housing and elderly housing with Gordon Forbes and Cynthia May, and we had a pool of knowledge about who was likely to need that housing, when we would start to think about moving them and planning it all. And I'm absolutely clear that if we want to have a quality town, then our younger people should be able to move into housing when they're ready, and particularly if they can't afford to pay the price of housing, and I would strongly argue that the price of housing should come down, they should be able to get council housing. And they should be given good housing, good quality housing, but to take the point you're making, they should be able to get jobs, because it's the jobs that will keep them here. It's not the house that will keep them here, it's the fact that they can work and earn money that keeps them here.
The types of housing that's coming up within the Highland Wide Development Plan, there's not really a lot of council houses or social housing involved in that.
No, we moved away from that idea. I mean, in my opinion, the sale of council housing was very badly handled. In principle, if people want to buy houses and can afford to buy houses, that was fine. But to sell houses at massive subsidy and allow people then to take that as profit and buy other houses has distorted the market. And this is where the whole basis of populations and population studies and understanding population is so important. And those of us who are baby boomers, born from 45 to the early 60s, everybody goes on about how much we're going to cost. All the evidence is that actually we're fitter and healthier than we've ever been, that we're likely to live longer, and we're likely to have some period of illness at the end of our life. Once that happens, and once we have died off, the population will go back into balance. So, and that's not that far away, it's 15, 20 years, so in terms of what we're talking about, it's not that difficult to plan our way through that. If the population's in balance, then we probably have already got enough housing. Now that doesn't mean we shouldn't be upgrading housing. One of the nice proposals was to do up the houses above the high street. Many of us think we should be buying some of the ex-council houses that are on the market and turning them back into council houses. The price they're at just now makes more sense to do that than it is to build new. And again, if you go back to this local thing, when we were in France, talking to one of the people about how they allocated it, if their local community and commune, which is about 600 of the population, needed a house for a local person, they would build it. So we should be back to almost that degree of sophistication. If there were 20 young Nairn couples who needed a house, then let's build 20 houses, or give them some of the existing housing stock by buying it and making it council housing. And I think we get very, very mixed up with the right to buy and this idea that you subsidise housing when it hasn't worked. So it should be that there's a mix of housing, there's nothing wrong with being in a rented house. If that rent is reasonable and you can afford it and you choose to do that, that seems to make absolute sense. And if you can't afford it, then we should have a system in place that allows that rent to be paid. But what we shouldn't do is allow that rental to be enormous.
Some people might argue that the developers are supplying or giving houses or building houses for people.
There's been very, very little evidence of that. As I say, I came to Nairn on the back of McDermott's. I lived through the whole real expansion with real jobs. There was a new house opening in Cranloch or in Croy every 2 or 3 days. A lot of these patients came onto my list and stayed on my list for 20 or 30 years. I saw them through that whole process. if we are actually saying that the jobs are here, if somebody like McDermott's turned up tomorrow and was genuinely going to produce these jobs, then we would need more houses. This idea, and I think it's another of these ideas that has seen its time, that you sold your house in England at some vast amount of money and then came up here and bought a cheaper house and used the difference for your pension. I'm just not seeing that anymore. So very hard to see any demand. There's 300-400 houses for sale in Nairn right now, so hard to see where they're trying to make this. And we've touched on this earlier, but it's worth saying again, if you look what's happened in Ireland, you look what's happened in Cyprus, you look what's happened in Spain and Portugal, Spain's meant to have somewhere between 800,000 and 900,000 empty houses. Ireland has several tens, if not hundreds of thousands of empty houses. Just building houses if nobody needs them and nobody wants them is not the answer.
Or nobody can afford.
Or nobody can afford them. But I mean, seemingly even in Spain, now you could, if you offer someone at 25,000 euros, you could get an apartment in these places. No bother at all. I mean, they are lying empty. And one of the things that does worry me, and this is where it's very important, is that people shouldn't be encouraged to buy houses if they can't afford them. Because if you look at the whole subprime financial crisis that we're in, and we're still in it because we owe trillions, most of that was by encouraging people to buy houses that they couldn't afford at a price that was ridiculous. And that was all based on the assumption that if they had to give up the house and the house was repossessed, it would be sold for more money in the market the next time. Now, if house prices are actually stable or falling, that market just doesn't exist. It's a fool's paradise.